Hello everyone, and welcome in to Listen In Lincoln County here on Fayetteville Public Utilities Channel 6 and on the Breakfast Club on WEKR and Newsmakers on WYTM. We appreciate all of you tuning in. I'm Don Counts, and today we're going to be talking about Black history, and February is Black History Month, and we have an old friend here, Mr. Thomas Kemp. Thomas, how you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Good.
And I'm able to get around and get out again and do some community service again.
Sure. So. Well, I usually see you at the Martin Luther King March, and so you've coordinated that a few years.
Right. People Helping People for Progress started that. Well, actually, People Helping People for Progress evolved out of the Martin Luther King March. Mm-hmm. A group of us got together and we're talking about having a march, and then after we had the march that day, we went into a meeting, and it was not until a couple months later that we even came up with the name for People Helping People for Progress. Mm-hmm. But I was one of the founders of People Helping People for Progress and the first president.
Oh, okay.
So we did get that organization going, and one of our tasks every year is the Martin Luther King March. Sure. And we really enjoy it. And hopefully it'll grow, and perhaps this program might help it to grow.
Sure. Well, let's talk about Thomas Kemp. Let's talk about, you've been around for a while. Tell us about where you were born and what brought you here.
Okay, well, I was born in Middletown, Ohio in 1937. And I went to public schools there, and I finished school in Middletown, Ohio. And I might just mention, I was on WKR this morning, and I mentioned then that I was never taught anything about Black history. Never had a Black teacher or anything, because the schools there were integrated. Mm-hmm. And so Black history was something, I just didn't even know it existed.
Sure.
Until I got out on my own and started.
Mm-hmm.
And I came to, I went to school in Southern California. I attended UCLA a year, USC a year, and wound up at Pepperdine. And I only went 1 quarter there. And that was really the extent of my education as far as a university go. I have one daughter, and she was born in California, in Los Angeles, and she still lives there. And I have one grandson, 5 years old. Mm-hmm. And we came back to, when my first wife and I separated, mm-hmm. I came back into this area, into mm-hmm. Ohio, because at that time I had a younger brother and sister. My younger brother was only 3 years old when I left home, and my sister was 3 months old. Oh. And so I had not been able to spend very much time with them, and our mother had passed away, and I just came back to be closer to them. Mm-hmm. And I went to Louisville, Kentucky, where a childhood friend of mine that had several restaurants there, Long John Silver restaurants and mm-hmm. and so forth. And I went to visit with him for a while, and I wound up staying in Louisville, Kentucky, for a little over a year, just about a year. Mm-hmm. And I joined the company there, Victor Metal Products, and I was in the furniture division there in Louisville, and they had a can division here in Fayetteville, over in Hedgemont, in the old, I don't know what that building is called, mm-hmm. but they had just floated a bond issue, I think, and and got a building out here in the Parkway. It was a building between Scoville and Amana.
Oh, yeah.
Where Amana uses it now for, I think, warehousing
Sure.
and so forth.
Sure.
Well, that was where Victor Metal Products was at. And of course, we made cast aluminum furniture, and made the toothpaste tubes and
Sure.
and everything.
I bet a lot of people don't remember that being here.
Right,
What years
right.
was that?
That was I came here in 1971.
Oh, okay.
And the cans and the tube division were already here at the time that I came. So I really don't know how long they had been here.
And it was called Victor Metal Products?
Victor Metal Products,
Right.
and Victor Craft was the furniture label.
About how many employees did they have? You remember?
Well, at times we had up to 40 or 50 employees because we had, in addition to the cast aluminum furniture in this plant, we had also some rattan furniture and everything. And then we had a plant in San Pedro, California, that manufactured rattan furniture, as well as a plant in Tappahannock, Virginia, that manufactured rattan furniture. So I was personnel manager for the furniture division of Victor Metal Products.
Wow, you know, I know that's not about Black history, but an interesting thing, that's Lincoln County history that a lot of people probably don't remember.
Yeah, right, I was the first Black in a position like that, because I came here as a personnel manager and safety director of well, really, like I said, the furniture division, and had all three of those plants.
That's interesting, and there again, you said you were one of the first Blacks in that position. If you talk about you were born in 1936, you have to say you may not have had Black history in school, but you lived Black history.
Oh yeah, I was able to, Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday and everything, and I personally saw Dr. Martin Luther King in Los Angeles at a big rally, and it was the first. You could feel the magnetism. He had a drawing power. That I've never been around anyone else that had that type of power. I mean, you just you just felt it all in the air and everything. And we were at I think it was Wrigley Field there in Los Angeles, but it was a big it was an old ball field and so forth where they used to play ball. And it was full that day.
Wow!
And it was really amazing.
And you got to see him.
I got to see him. I got to see him.
Not a lot of people, I bet you know, who actually really got to see him, though, are they?
No, it's not a lot of people that I know that have ever saw.
I'm sure he was very protected back in those days.
Oh, when they drove him right to the stage in a convertible, and he got out, and when he finished, they put him back in the convertible, and he had to just drive because. Like I said, he had a magnetism about him, and people wanted to touch him.
Sure.
And all that. So he was surrounded, and they whisked him away pretty fast.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Martin Luther King. I know we had Martin Luther King. What day? On Monday, January
15th.
15th. Okay. Okay. So you take somebody like from my age and below. My daughter was out of school, and so she asked me, who was Martin Luther King? So can you tell the folks at home and the folks listening on radio who Martin Luther King was? People who might not remember exactly what he represented.
Okay, Martin Luther King, and it's very interesting because his wife just died yesterday, Coretta Scott King. But Dr. Martin Luther King was he was a minister pastoring a church in Montgomery, Alabama. And Rosa Parks had refused to give up her seat on the bus. Now, the church that had called Dr. Martin Luther King to pastor was a Baptist church that had gotten rid of their previous minister because they thought he was too bullish, because he wanted to change some things, and they didn't want that. And they thought with a younger man coming in, we'll be safe and everything. But they didn't know that Dr. Martin Luther King was, I truly believe he was ordained for the work that he did. And when he was called there to preach, he took that position, and he ordered the Southern Christian Leadership Council, and they really pushed for civil rights and so forth. He led marches wherever there was a group of people that was being mistreated or anything. Dr. Martin Luther King spoke for them, and he was a very elegant speaker. And this is why we need to truly keep his dream alive. And he believed that civil rights and everything could be changed and gained through passive resistance. He was a great student of Gandhi in India, and Gandhi had fasted and just used passive resistance. And the reason I say that he was truly ordained for that work, because you, Don, and myself, you know that we're not going to stand and let somebody turn a hose on us or beat us or sick dogs on us without without fighting back.
Sure, sure.
But not only was he able to do this, but the people around him, he was able to train people to do this and to take this type of abuse and everything. And I think that one of the field trips ought to be for, at some time or another, every child should visit, probably the closest place around here is the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum, the Civil Rights Institute. Sure. Because once you go there, it just changes the way that you feel about things. Now, I was sitting out I lived in California at that time, and you know, we would send money, be in churches, we'd take up a collection and send money and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't really realize the impact of what they were going through until I visited that museum. And that museum just changed my way of thinking and got me started.
Let's talk about Rosa Parks. You mentioned her having to give up her seat on the bus. Now, for a lot of folks, they're not going to understand. Why did she have to give up her seat? What was the reason?
Because the buses, blacks had certain rows of seats in the back of the bus that they could sit down if there were no white people on the bus. But if there were white people that needed a seat, then the black people had to get up and give them their seat. And Rosa Parks was on the bus that day coming home from work, and she was sitting there, and bus driver told her to get up and give her seat up to a man, and she refused. Now, she wasn't the first woman to do it, but she was the first because another woman had did it earlier and was arrested, but I guess the timing wasn't right.
Right.
And but when Rosa did it that day, the timing was right, and they arrested her and took her to jail for not, you know, just thanks for somebody not giving up your seat that you paid. You got on the bus and paid for it just like somebody else, and then somebody gonna come along and tell you, well, you got to get up and give your seat up to somebody else.
Sure.
Well, she just didn't do it that day.
As I said, my daughter might not understand it, but I don't even understand that. I mean, I'm 41 years old, and I can't even imagine all my life, you know, the blacks and whites were always together. But I have heard stories through history. Maybe we can even, we'll talk about, we had a black school here.
That's right.
And that, for the younger generation, is probably not, they're going to understand that.
That's right. Now, the first black schools here were over on Market Street, the Market Street School. And I think they went in that school until the 9th grade, and then eventually they built another school or added on to it, which was a high school. And but originally, the older people in Fayetteville that wanted to go on to school, high school, they had to go to Shelbyville or somewhere, because there wasn't a high school here, a black high school here, and they could not go to a white school or integrated. And it always amazed me, like people talk about busing. Well, I'm against busing too, but I think that it's only fair for blacks to be bused to white schools now.
Sure.
Because for a long time they were all bused to one school, and there was no issue about busing then. Busing was fine, so it's just as good now. But it was really something. And then of course they had West End High, which was
later.
That was later. That came about in about 1950, and lasted until 1966. And even though the Brown decision that was handed down by the Supreme Court that integrated the schools, Fayetteville and Lincoln County was about 10 years late doing it.
10 years later after.
That's right.
Wow.
The decision was handed down in 1954, and that schools were not separate and equal. That was the thing. The people that was in favor of keeping segregation, they said, well, the schools they're segregated, but they're equal. Well, they weren't equal. The blacks got books that were handed down, that were pages torn out, and all that kind of stuff. And though there was nothing equal about them, and that was what the decision said. That the schools were not equal and that they had to integrate.
Right.
And
well, let's talk about civil rights. Let's talk about civil rights from the ground up. For the youngsters listening, what is civil rights and when did it start? Okay,
so civil rights is merely you're born into a country or in a city, and you have the same. I have the same right as you have. We all have civil rights. We're protected by civil rights. The right to vote, the right to go to school, the right to express yourself. This country had it not been for Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, this country could not be fighting in Iraq, trying to tell them about a democratic government, because even though it was a democracy here, a democratic government, and when I say democratic, I'm not talking about a party or anything,
right.
But it was a democracy here, but it wasn't a very good democracy. It wasn't a working democracy. And of course, a bad thing is that you can't legislate these things. And over the period of times, as the older people, the true segregationists are pushed out of the way and everything, hopefully the younger people going to school together and coming together and everything, that one day I look forward to the day when we don't have to have a Black History Month because it's just integrated into the school system.
Sure.
The Black history is just taught in the regular schools just like any other history would be taught.
It's amazing for a lot of people my age and younger to realize that you didn't, in the early days, you didn't use the same bathroom we used. There was all kinds. And here's one thing that's very interesting: blacks couldn't vote.
That's right, until the Voting Act.
And when did that happen?
The Voting Act, there was actually two Voting Acts. The blacks were given the right to vote in believe it was. I don't remember the exact date,
Well, that's fine.
but they were given the right to vote. But in the South and other places, they had all kind of restrictions, poll taxes, and just anything to keep them from voting.
Oh, so supposedly they had to pay?
Right.
I never heard that one before.
And just anything to keep them from being able to vote. So even though they had the right to vote, they could not vote. And then when the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964, was that was what John Kennedy was working on when he was assassinated, and what Dr. Martin Luther King and the Southern Christian Leadership Council was pushing for, the NAACP, and all these organizations, black organizations, was pushing for a Civil Rights Act. And so that was the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was the most famous one, and the one that truly eliminated all these kind of things. But even though some states still, I think now in some states they're trying to say that you have to have a picture identification to come. Well, most people think that almost everybody drives, so you would have that on your driver's license, and perhaps that's not as bad as some of the other things, but it will hinder some people from voting, especially older blacks and so forth.
Sure.
So it's very important that we learn about the Civil Rights Acts, and it gave blacks the right, well, it gave everybody, not just blacks, it gave everybody the right to vote, and eliminated all the poll taxes and this type of thing.
It's got to make you feel good that you've come a long way, and I know you still have a long way to go, is what you're trying to say.
Right. It is a long way, and people are getting together. They're going to school together, and so it just makes it a whole lot better.
We done a little research about as far back. We're going way back now, but President Lincoln, and he was the one who worked on trying to abolish slavery.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Now President Lincoln he came out against slavery. He said that it was wrong. But the Civil War was not fought over slavery. The Civil War was fought because the southern states were trying to succeed from the Union. And that's why the war was fought. A war probably never would have been fought just over slavery. But the states that were trying to leave the Union, that was what the Civil War was actually fought about.
Right.
And it's very interesting that General Lee, who became was the general for the South, the President Lincoln wanted him as a general for the North because he was a very, very able general.
And something a lot of people might not think about, there was a lot of blacks fighting in that war.
That's right. There were a lot of blacks in that war, and they had the name of Buffalo Soldiers.
Oh.
And the Buffalo Soldiers were the blacks, and they got that name just because I think they said that the Indians said that they looked like buffaloes, and they had, but they fought in the war, and many of them, even though the South was where the slaves were at, many of them were fighting for the South, for the Confederates. So they were very loyal to what they call their masters and so forth, because.
Going back as far as when, I know you know a lot about the black history, but when slaves became free, talk about some of the things that blacks had to adjust to.
Okay, well, of course, when slaves first became free, it was some of the slaves when they first became free, they served in Congress as senators and in the House of Representatives and everything, because what they call the carpetbaggers that came down from the north, and it was a matter of not wanting the southern politicians to be in, so they put black politicians in a lot of those positions at that time.
Sure.
But then it didn't last very long, and that was
That's interesting.
yeah. It didn't last very long, and then they were pushed back, and it was, well, as you know, that there was many years before other blacks were put in, elected to those positions.
For the younger people at home watching and listening, now, blacks were owned by white people, correct?
That's right. They were actually owned.
Owned by them. And I know that's backing up a little bit from afterward, but for a long time, people owned other people, and for the young kids at home, they're not going to understand that. I can't even understand that.
Well, it was that you would go to an auction, just like they have auctions now for furniture and selling land and all that kind of stuff. And they would put these slaves on the slave block.
And these are black people.
Black people brought over from Africa and some of the islands and so forth against their will. And they would actually auction them off. And a good, strong young man in his late teens, early 20s, they were the ones that would bring the most money, because they could do anything. You know, they'd make them do anything, and work the fields and cotton and toil the land, and families were split up, like families, and sometimes a master would sell the wife and children and keep the male, or do vice versa, sell them. Maybe if the man was a little bit belligerent or something like that, they'd want to sell him and keep the wife and children, or sell the husband and wife and keep the children. So families were split up and didn't have any say in it, because if a master decided that he wanted to get rid of them, and they had, if you go to the library and look in the census book, I think they go back as far as 1820 or 1810, that you will see here in Fayetteville, families being owned and having slaves and so forth.
And as tough as that might be for people to imagine that white people owned black people in some ways, and then in many ways, as you know, that time that's really all they knew. And then when they became free, they had to relearn an entire lifestyle.
That's right. Many of them were brought here and didn't know anything
no
about
education.
this country, no education or anything. And it was against the law for a black to learn to read and write. And so the ones that could read and write did it in most cases without the master's knowledge. Now, there were some masters that encouraged them to learn to read and write and everything. And so that was well, you might say that was a good thing for that time. And but if you were caught with a book or reading or something like that, you were strict measures were taken against you, because they did not want the blacks to learn to read and write. And so when they were freed, it was just an entirely different world for them. And most of them, they had several undergrounds that would take them into the northern states, and there were people in the northern states that would help them and put them up. And see, it's really strange how slavery works, because the people in the north, most of them came from the same places that the people in the south came from. They came from England and those places like that. But still, the people living in the southern states that relied on cotton and stuff like that for a living, to make their living. They use slave labor.
Mm-hmm. Looking at your own personal life, how far back in your family, I mean your mother, your father, your grandfather, were any of those slaves, or how close does it become?
Okay, well, my grandmother was born in 1880. At one time, I was the 4th generation on my father's side and the 5th generation on my mother's side. That 5th generation on my mother's side stepped back into slavery.
Okay.
And stepped back into slavery. And my great-great-great-grandmother was a slave.
But so you take 1936 when you were born, and then say 50 years prior to that, you have actually seen a lot of changes in black.
Oh, it's been so many changes until sometimes you get confused yourself.
Sure.
I can remember back when I was a child, blacks were called Negroes, and then they didn't want to be called Negroes. They wanted to be called blacks. There was a period that we went through where they were called black, and then African American, and everything. But the main thing is we just want to be Americans.
Sure.
Yeah.
And if you take 1936 and prior, some of the things that you saw, I guess you went to a black school?
No, I didn't go to a black school.
Okay.
Because, but I did encounter several instances of prejudice in the North. When I was in high school, on the high school debate team, and we were going to Athens, Ohio, where, not Ohio State, but where Ohio University is at. And they could not get a room for me there in the hotels. And our debate team, we had a discussion about whether or not to go. And finally there was a young man from Middletown that was going to Ohio University, and he was coming home that weekend. So he had heard about the situation, and he offered me his room to stay in while that weekend. And but the amazing thing about it was he had a roommate from Florida who was very wealthy, and they actually had 2 rooms, and I'll never forget as long as I live. And the downside to my staying in that room was they had a pet alligator.
Oh.
Then he was in a cage and everything, and they would take that alligator. They had big rubber gloves, and they would take that heavy, big rubber heavy gloves. They would take that alligator out of the cage and walk him, just like you walk a dog on a leash and everything. And needless to say that I did not rest very well that night because my eyes was on that alligator. But that's a true story.
Wow.
And that happened in Athens, Ohio.
Wow. So there's some good stories along the way, with the many, many bad, I'm sure.
Right.
And so let's talk about the civil rights as it moves on into after 1964, some of the things that's happened. So 1964 was when I was born, and so my recollection is the blacks and whites always went to school together, but I know that wasn't the truth.
Right. Okay. Well, if we go back just a few years before '64 and before the Civil Rights Acts and so forth, Harry Truman had integrated the services. Now, I mean, it's hard to imagine people out fighting for their country and having segregated brigades,
So they had black soldiers and white soldiers.
Black soldiers and white soldiers, no mixture or anything. And Harry Truman was the first president to integrate services. And then even after he integrated the services, you still had predominantly black platoons and white platoons and so forth. But it certainly has gotten a whole lot better. since 1964, black teachers start integrating here in Fayetteville. They start integrating the schools in 1964. So a few teachers were scattered about in the different schools, and then they started closing down West End High. 1966 was the last year that a class graduated from West End High. They integrated into Central High School at that time here, and it just so much of the it's an undercurrent. There's not a whole lot of prejudice that you see on the surface. You don't see signs saying black restroom and white restroom. You don't see signs saying black drinking fountain and white drinking fountain. You don't get on the bus and have to go to the back or anything like that. But in social and the differences are in the workplace and in society and all that, the blacks are still way behind in their earnings and the capital that's available to different families is not like what's available to white families and so forth. But we're coming along because each generation is getting a little bit better. Our children are going to school. They're learning in the homes and so forth, and so things are getting better.
As we continue to talk with Thomas Kemp about Black history, we've got a couple of pictures here, some of our local leaders. And one guy that we've talked about around here in Channel 6 is Dr. Donaldson. Tell us a little bit about Dr. Donaldson and his life here.
Well, Dr. Donaldson was, he wound up here. He was going to Meharry. He graduated from Meharry Medical School, and he was wanting a place to do some practice, and he had heard about Fayetteville and heard that there was not a black doctor in Fayetteville, Negro doctor at that time they were called.
Now, you telling me that you had to have a black doctor as well?
Oh yeah, because well, now Fayetteville was kind of fortunate because the old Dr. Patrick Sr. and Dr. McGrady, they would assist Dr. Donaldson with doctoring black people, but they also would treat them. But there again, you would have to go to the back of the office, go in the back, or something to that effect. And but they were a little more lenient than in a lot of places, because some places, if you didn't have a black doctor, if you didn't have a black undertaker and everything, you were just in bad shape. You really went to the next city, just like I was saying about the black students that wanted to go to high school here had to go to Shelbyville because if they wanted that education, that's where they were going to go.
Sure. Well, that's very interesting. And again, I keep going back to this. That is so hard for even me to imagine, but especially the younger generation. Let's talk about the black youngsters growing up. Is it your duty? You're trying to teach them about black history and about how things were, because they're not going to have a clue how things were.
Right. We definitely want to keep black history going. Teaching it, teach black history is every opportunity we get until it is fully integrated into the school systems. That's where it needs to be, because really a separate black history, it really does two things. One thing, as long as you have a Black History Month, you're not going to have black history taught in the schools, because on a regular basis, because you got your Black History Month. So we'll teach some black history, we'll touch on it during Black History Month. And that's what it is. They touch on it. It's a token, and so forth. And so it's from that standpoint, it's bad. But from the standpoint, since there is no Black history being taught, then we must have a Black History Month, and where we truly stress Black history. And there's so much Black history that you just can't cover it.
Can't cover it all. One thing, we talk about leaders, local leaders, and I have to say, you've got to be one of the leaders to have a position like you had back in the 70s. And you were one of the first Blacks to have. Talk about some of the other local people that was inspirational to you, who did well.
Okay, well, of course, the ones that I talked about this morning on WEKR was William Red Jones.
Who was he?
Okay, he was a brick mason and a builder. He owned a store. He was on the city school board. Let me make sure. No, he was on the county school board, and he was a city alderman and the first Black to serve as vice mayor.
William Red Jones.
William Red Jones.
He was vice mayor.
Yeah, and there's a street out here named for him.
Okay.
William Jones Boulevard.
Sure.
Yeah, that's that. He belonged up to St. Paul AME Church, where I go to church at. He was very, very outspoken. He was very active around here in Democratic politics and everything. And he along with some of the other leaders were the ones that kept the peace and kept Fayetteville from erupting like a lot of other schools did when they integrated and so forth. It was just a gradual thing here.
Well, we're going to get back to local leaders. We'll talk about more, but one thing you mentioned is the St. Paul AME Church. That building itself's got a lot of Black history to it. One of the first Black churches.
Oh yeah, it does. It has a lot of history. A lot of meetings were held there, and of course, it hasn't been publicized, but we got on the National Register.
Oh, okay.
I think it was about 3 years ago.
Good.
So St. Paul is a National Historical building now.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about some more local leaders. Who else you got?
Okay, of course there was Pudmore.
What's his name?
Pudmore.
Pudmore.
Yeah,
okay.
And he used to have a slaughterhouse here. And I'll tell you, when I first came to Fayetteville and I was trying to come down Calhoun Street there, and you couldn't get through there. Cars were lined up, and I really didn't know what it was. And it was people bringing their hogs to Pudmore to slaughter.
So it's cold, I guess. That's killing hogs.
Yeah, right. It was cold. I guess it started in December and January and February, but you could not get through there. It would be so many cars down there. And of course, he served on Pudmore served on the city school board, I believe.
Wow.
And then, of course, William Battle.
William Battle. I've heard that name.
Right.
He is what I would consider Coach Battle.
He Coach Battle. That's what everybody called him, and he coached the men's basketball at West End High. He coached football, and then later he coached after he got older and the schools were integrated and everything. He coached the Special Olympics.
Oh.
And I think he really enjoyed that and worked with the handicapped people.
I did not know that.
Yeah, he was I believe he was the first coaches that did the Special Olympics here.
Very good.
And then of course you got, there's no way that you can touch on all the people, but
let's do a couple more.
Yeah, well, Professor L.C. Curtis.
L.C. Curtis, he's still around and very active.
He's still around and very active. And the thing that a lot of people don't know about L.C. Curtis is he taught building construction in the West End High School.
Oh.
And in the early 60s, he and just the class of boys that he was teaching built 5 houses.
Wow.
That are still standing here in Fayetteville and that people still are living in. And to me, and so many of the young men that he had in his classes were able to go out and get in the construction business, some their own business, others working in construction and everything. And he was, of course, he's still assistant superintendent, and I think he's, when Golden retires, I think he's going to retire too.
Oh,
but he's
okay. Wow. Well, now he's also on the planning commission. I think he's a chairman of the board of the planning commission, and so that's a very, very important role for and he's done so well, and a very, very nice gentleman.
And he's I hope he don't mind me saying it, but I think he's 81 or 82.
Well, he sure don't look it. He's done well.
He has done well, and he's like you said, he's a fine gentleman, and I just you know, that to take those boys and build those houses and things like that. That's really quite an accomplishment.
Sure, it is. I have to say too that a good friend of mine, Polly Jeter at 911, I remember her talking a few years ago. We had an interview, and she told me she was the first black female to work at SERS, and she's still working today.
Oh yeah, well, Polly has a lot of firsts. She was the first black in the communications.
Sure.
She was the first black woman police officer, and she rode in the cars with them and everything. So Polly is she's been a leader in this community a long time, and this year she's taken that leadership training class.
Right, that's a great program.
Right, right.
Well, Mr. Kemp, is there anything else before we wrap things up?
Well, the only thing that I would like to say is I would like to thank the electric system for their part, what they're doing to make this a better community, and we, as blacks and whites, we've just got to come together.
Sure.
And like I said, you can legislate all you want to, but it has to be in the hearts of people, and people just can't judge people or deny people. If I've done something wrong or something like that, you know, I might can correct that. But if you don't like me because of the color of my skin, there's nothing I can do about that because God gave that to me.
That's right. That's right. Let's do one more quick plug for people, helping people for progress. Tell us a little bit about that group, and for folks interested in that, what would they need to do?
Okay. People helping people for progress. We try to see that no injustice comes to no one, and we give scholarships because we want to encourage young people to go on to school and so forth. The scholarship is available to anybody. There are certain guidelines and so forth, and then we have a scholarship committee that would select a person from that, but the applications are at the school, high school, and like I said, I want to encourage everybody to apply for it. Hopefully, maybe this year we might even give 2 scholarships. We have discussed it. I don't know whether we're going to be able to do it or not just yet, but we're hoping to.
As we've talked about black history, and as we look toward the future, what do you hope that your children and grandchildren will see in the future?
Well, I hope that that one day we'll live in a society where color doesn't matter at all in social life, in civil life, and everything else. That a man is just judged by their character. Thank
you very much for being on the program.
All right, I certainly enjoyed it, and I hope that we've said something that will encourage people to study the history of Black history, and especially Black history of Lincoln County.
That's right. February is Black History Month, and we appreciate Thomas Kemp being here with us today. Very interesting program and a lot of great details there. We appreciate all of you tuning in on WEKR's Breakfast Club, WYTM's Newsmakers, and all the folks on Channel 6 here at Fayetteville Public Utilities. I'm Don Counts, and we'll see you back in here next time on Listen In Lincoln County.